U.S. President Donald Trump signed a proclamation Wednesday night, preventing people from 12 countries from entering the United States. The ban will take effect on Monday at 12:01 a.m.
Very simply, we cannot have open migration from any country where we cannot safely and reliably vet and screen those who seek to enter the United States. That is why today I am signing a new executive order placing travel restrictions on countries including Yemen, Somalia, Haiti, Libya, and numerous others. The strength of the restrictions we're applying depends on the severity of the threat posed. The list is subject to revision based on whether material improvements are made, and likewise, new countries can be added as threats emerge around the world. But we will not allow people to enter our country who wish to do us harm, and nothing will stop us from keeping America safe. Thank you very much.
The list results from an executive order that Mr. Trump issued requiring the Departments of State and Homeland Security and the Director of National Intelligence to compile a report on hostile attitudes towards the U.S. and whether entry from certain countries represented a national security risk. Andrew Donaldson from OrdinaryTimes.com joined us for more on the ban.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good to see you again. Appreciate the time.
Now, we've been here before with Trump enacting something similar in his first term. Is there any evidence that this makes Americans any safer?
Possibly. Now, you got to go back to the first term. You're exactly right. Now, that was called the Muslim ban, even though it expended a little bit more than just that. But it got put out, then it got revised, then it went through the court system, and ultimately the Supreme Court ruled on a stark divide that this was within the purview of the president to do. And one of the important parts of that ruling was they have to separate what he says in rhetoric, and he likes to lead by dictate, to what the actual law says, and the law gives him the power with very broad discretion to do this sort of thing. Now, the numbers is the part that gets kind of tricky on this. These are mostly countries that are danger zones. They are failed states. They are dictatorships. They are places that aren't going to have a lot of people coming into the country anyway. So is it going to be kind of on the margins as far as the numbers go? Yes, but the bigger part of this is the rhetoric and the perception of it of this is strong. He mentioned the Colorado case and the Boulder attack against the Jewish protests, even though that wouldn't have stopped that particular individual who was a visa overstay. And they've learned because that first batch from the first administration in this executive order, when you read the fine print, very specifically talks about things like visa overstays, talks about cooperation with deporting back. This is an administration that is adapting and learning. So even though it is a remix from the first one and the actual numbers may not be a big bump in what they're saying, they are learning, adapting, and getting a little bit better at this.
Now, I want to break down some of the dialogue that Donald Trump used yesterday when addressing this travel ban. So what exactly does hostile attitudes towards the U.S. mean? And does that open the door for poor decision-making on who can enter the U.S.?
Well, it's a good key point to get into because it means basically right now, until it's litigated by a court system, whatever Donald Trump wants it to mean, because again, this is an executive order. So until it's challenged, hostile action means whatever it is. Now, clearly you have places like Iran is on this list. Iran every Friday has state-sponsored cheering for death to America. Clearly they're a threat. There's other things like Venezuela, which has a dictatorship that we have issues with. Cuba, which has been a problem for decades and decades and decades. They're back on this list now again. So there are threats here. And there is a clear and needed issue with some of these countries. But you're right, the nomenclature matters a lot. And until the court system goes through it, which they may not do because the Supreme Court precedent has now been set on this, it means pretty much whatever they want it to mean. So they can point to something that pops up in the news item. They can point to anything they're doing with the deportation in individual cases and use it. And now they have a justification in the executive order because it's going to take a while to get anybody to push back against it because it's just that, an executive order, and Congress is probably not going to have the appetite to challenge him on any of this.
And what would this mean for people who are trying to flee these countries and go to the United States?
Well, there are going to be some exceptions, but now it's going to be a whole lot harder. And remember, one of the things the Trump administration has really cracked down on is things like the asylum system and things like that. It's already overwhelmed anyway, but with them being on this list, you basically have to go directly through the State Department and get high-level authorization and waivers to get anybody through these things. For example, one nation on this list is Afghanistan, and it's already been a point of contention. Afghanistan refugees, a lot of whom helped us during the 20 years America was in Afghanistan, being here there have now become subject to deportation. Now, nobody else is going to be coming, and there's a lot of good, valid reasons for that because of the Taliban, but it's an excellent point of exactly how complicated this can get in a hurry. People that legitimately need to try to get a refugee status or asylum, or people we are working with. Remember, our clandestine services work with people in these all the time. They would like to normalize these folks that help us and come into the country. They're going to have a much harder path to do it. It's basically going to have to come directly from the Secretary of State to get a waiver for any of this.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for the time today.
Anytime, Theresa. Appreciate your time.